Our opening prompt for today's episode. What was your version of the talk?
Goodness, I don't remember. And I would say that to give my, parents, to give my mom credit, my dad had nothing to do with any of these conversations. There was more than one talk, so it was the thing that I feel like you're supposed to do where you kind of socialize the idea and talk about it in advance. So that was a good thing. Cons, or if I was to give my mom some constructive criticism, I would say that it wasn't really a sex talk in that there was no how-to. It was more just kind of a morality thing, and I think about waiting till marriage. So yeah, I don't know. I think overall I would rate my mom a 6 out of 10. Thanks, Mom. Which I think is great coming from a very conservative Christian background. A 6 out of 10 rated on a curve is an 11. How about you, Kelly?
I was thinking, I think that yes, only really related to morality, wait until marriage and wait. But the one thing that we did have where I got some information to give you an idea of how little I had was that when I first got my period, I couldn't figure out the tampon because I kept on putting it in my pee hole. And so I was it's still making a mess.
No, I'm here.
It's still making a mess with the pees coming out on it. And so I tried to explain the issue I was having to my mom. Am I doing it wrong? Do I need to put it further up the hole?
Give yourself a reverse kidney stone.
My mom looked at me and she's like, I hope that this helps you. There are 3 holes.
Okay, so and how old were you at the time, right? When you started, I don't know, 12, 13?
Yeah. It feels like by then I should have known that there was a vagina hole. But we also there was no, no touching of ourselves. 2 points from your mom. Yeah. The way that our house was, we always had to keep our bedroom doors open until it was bedtime. So there's I've heard from other friends of mine where they're like, oh, I was 6 and I was exploring around there. I'm like, oh, never.
The way I was going to say is that, was this strictly a no masturbation thing, or was it just, how was it presented to you?
As we got into high school, it seemed a little bit more no masturbation, and then also especially if we had friends or guys over, all the doors are going to be open, but that made a little bit more sense. But it did make it that there just wasn't a lot of privacy. I was actually thinking that the first time that I ever felt anything sexual it had to be before 8th grade, because I remember thinking about it when I learned about Pavlov's dog in 8th grade. But
say more.
I was flying on an international flight and I was next to my dad, and I don't want to objectify Matt Damon, but I was watching The Bourne Identity.
I think Matt Damon's used to being objectified by now.
There was a scene and I was like, I just felt something.
Oh, good memory. I couldn't even tell you what mine was. Yeah, maybe something around Harrison Ford and Star Wars. He was it for me. Or Leonardo DiCaprio in Titanic. I know.
I was also thinking about what our schools did. I went to Catholic school all throughout, and I have a distinct memory of a big assembly. We had a speaker hired to come and give this talk, and it was all about saving for marriage, and he directly addressed the woman in the school, and he was like, if a guy is telling you that the way to show that he loves him is to suck on this area, what does that tell you? And it was such a bad portrayal of sexual actions and all that. And then we all got a pure love promise card afterwards. It was a credit card that we kept there, and it was to give to our husbands on the day of our marriage.
You literally cash in your virginity on the day of your marriage. That's sad. And I feel like I want to give him some credit if we're kind of rating everybody's various sex talks here. I want to give him some credit for there are some elements of I do want to teach my daughter that if a guy teaches you that the only way to earn his affection is to suck his dick, then I do want to teach that message, but in a very different context, because I feel like, again, this is all putting the burden of purity on the women, talking about purity at all. Yeah. And I'm just gonna guess that this guy was like an older man who gave off creepy vibes that made nobody want to listen to him, and it's kind of like reefer madness, basically having the side effect of like all the kids being like, yeah, I should try weed. That sounds cool.
It was like Wolf of Wall Street, but for virginity. Pretty charismatic.
Your assembly made me think of my sex talk that I had in a church context. So I didn't go to Catholic school, but I was in a conservative sect of the Lutheran church growing up. And so this was the age that you had to be in confirmation class. So this would have been middle school, 6th or 7th grade. And we were told that there would be a Christian sex ed component to this because what we receive in the schools is insufficient. In Indiana at the time, so what we were receiving in school was absolutely insufficient because, yeah, like you, I'm not sure that I really knew that there was a third hole at this stage either. So yeah, very, very bare bones education. So sounds similar to your assembly. This was an older man, the pastor, we'll call him Pastor M, gives you, he hypes this all up. And I think you're at an age where you're like, I have questions, I'm curious. It was the most disappointing non-sexual sex talk. I mean, I guess not disappointing because I'm not sure that I needed a 70-year-old man to be telling me about the birds and the bees. But it was just like these really stories of like his courtship of Mrs. Pastor M, which were kind of cute, if old-fashioned. And then I remember there was a diagram of, he always drew all these diagrams for everything that he talked about in the Bible. That was like a sledder on a hill. And it was basically, he was just explaining the slippery slope fallacy to us. But he spent an extended amount of time, like that was my main takeaway from Christian sex ed, was the sled on the hill. And basically like if you start touching somebody, then you have no idea. I think basically that it will lead to you will get pregnant or you will get chlamydia, which they didn't even talk about, to be honest. It wasn't even like they talked about the negative side effects of sex before marriage. It was like, you just did nothing really came the sled, there was a lot of euphemisms. There was a sled going down a hill and talk about the progression of walking together and then talking together, but he didn't really we didn't even get to first base. Christian sex ed didn't get to first base, so yeah.
Talking and then talking.
Yeah, and it was kind of going steady. I mean, it was a lot of very like 1950s terminology, so yeah, I think once you got past going steady, there was just sort of a big gray area cloud with sleds whooshing down the hill into sin and hell, with little description. Yeah, and then marriage, at which point, you know, suddenly you're going from this purity mentality, where, you know, your body is untouchable, to suddenly you're supposed to be in this marriage and be fruitful and multiply. I guess, you know, in a lot of Christian contexts, the sex is really around procreation. So then we don't really talk about female pleasure at all, or why were created with the ability to experience pleasure that has nothing to do with procreation. Yeah, and so I guess that's kind of an interesting transition also that we're supposed to hit, is to go from just, yeah, not thinking about yourself, not touching yourself, not knowing that there's a third hole, to...
It's the well-known thing about me that I'm very, very into romantasy and smut, and there is a different kind of theme in romantasy worlds where a big part of like a rite is that all men need to learn how to like pleasure the woman, and women need to learn how to pleasure the men before they can even enter into a marriage. Like they go to a teacher to make sure that they know how to. And it's interesting because it's obviously extremely ridiculous in the books and totally overdone in a wonderful way that I enjoy, but it's not like realistic. But it makes you wonder, okay, where, and this is a transition to where do we get our actual education from?
Yes. Okay. I was talking about this with some friends the other night, and she was talking about her experience that her mom actually did have the sex talk with her in a realistic way. Her mom's also not Christian, so there you go. The one thing that her mom didn't mention to her was about peeing after sex, and so she got a UTI like the first time that she had sex.
I can't imagine my mom ever educating me in high school or college to pee after sex, because
Right.
it would mean that I was having sex.
Like a lot of things, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know that my mom knows about that, or that like anybody ever talked to her about that, or where she would have found this information out, unless maybe your gynecologist tells you or something. I was thinking in my head, because I was like, I've definitely kind of always known that you're supposed to do that. And then I realized Cosmo. Cosmo is where I got all of my functional information about sex, which I did not have a subscription to Cosmo, obviously, but I had the cool friend who lived down the street in middle school, and her parents totally subscribed her to Cosmo. It was kind of a mixed bag. I definitely remember learning from there about basic things like peeing after sex. I also remember something about putting in an ice cube in your mouth before you give a guy a blowjob for like a zesty, different sensation. I've never actually tried this, but I did inquire once, and the feedback was that does not sound like something that a man would like, but I don't know, maybe different men. I think also sometimes Cosmo was just filling pages, so mixed bag. Not the best teacher, but reliable.
One of my friends, who is otherwise, extremely private, extremely prude, was like, in college, I got this idea to go down on my boyfriend with Pop Rocks.
Oh.
Which I'm like so messy. I just think of like the sugar there and like ants, and I don't like the idea.
I legitimately want to poll some men about how they would feel about a blowjob with Pop Rocks. It doesn't sound.
I was curious about this. I looked into Reddit options a little bit. There is a really funny book, it's not meant to be funny. There's a book written by a man for other men, and it's titled She Comes First. It's by Ian Kerner. It seems to have aspects of it that are good. So for example, he says that for women, foreplay is core play, and it's extremely essential, and to always make sure that she comes before even penetration. But this is not the part that got me. The part that got me is that he recommends vignette wine while you're going down on a girl to sip between breaks, because it tastes of vignette wine. It goes well with vagina. Which I'm just imagining if you're like in the early stages with a guy and he's like, just let me pour my glass of vignette first.
Now, did he go to an actual sommelier for this feedback, or this is just from his personal research?
Oh, it's a man. It's all from his personal
That's
research.
True. The only expertise you need is your own. But I want to give him all the credit for his general thesis statement, which is great.
The general thesis, strong. The idea that all women are going to be one way and that he has mastered it for all. So here is exactly how you will do it. And
this
here's
just
exactly
that smells like manosphere bro podcasting to me a little bit. And on one hand, I'm like, if there are helpful things that the general male public, the general hetero male public can glean from these kinds of things, then by all means, as long as it's not too polluted with other kinds of, power dynamic things of just kind of establishing your supremacy, then great. And if there's some weird things in there, I guess it's just this is male Cosmo, right?
Yeah.
You're gonna have some ice cube blowjobs thrown in, which to me sounds a little bit like the wine pairing, but I'm never having tried this. Now I'm more curious than anything.
Just pour a glass for your husband the next time he's getting ready. And then there's Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. Oh, you've read it?
Uh-huh.
Okay, I was kind of interested in the idea of the accelerators and the brakes. I want your opinions on it.
Yeah, it's been a little while since I read it, but I think it was recommended to me as a very good entry point for like a sex kind of conversation, especially for women coming out of this Christianity purity kind of conversation.
What I was interested about is, do you think it's something that's more catered towards married women and women in a long-term relationship, or do you think it's something that could be given to an 18 or a 19-year-old woman who hasn't?
Yeah. The question is that it kind of covers everything, and that she's very, sex positive in the way that she's a sex educator. It's just about female pleasure. And so I don't think that it's especially in the context of like relationships or anything like that. So, yeah.
I think that my sister told me in college, My sister is like 4 or 5 years older than me, and she was always a little bit more experienced than me. But she was the one who told me like that the clitoris is actually where it's at, not the middle.
For me, a Cosmo is the only reason that I know about the clitoris's existence, because I don't think that my older sister was any better off than I was, and I did not have the older sibling who was like the more sexually experienced or adventurous one. So it was all Cosmo for me.
I was thinking about how like high school gossip kind of informed things for me, because I didn't have a steady boyfriend during high school or anything, so I was more learning from like what others were saying and what was making it through the grapevine. But because everybody was coming from a little bit like the same lens of like, raised in a very Catholic household, it was all the same way that you would expect, whereas like, this girl is a whore, she went down on this guy, she let him do her from the back, all that. It's always like the man and really, really awesome. It was never, not unsurprisingly, the gossip was never like they had a really wonderful conversation about what both were comfortable with and then comfortably went into these things.
Only. Although I have faith for the young people today. I just feel like there's so many more conversations. Maybe because as we age, we're all getting kind of better at having real conversations with our kids. But I feel like the kids are all right. Like there's a lot more of these conversations happening today. Although we should really, like bring an actual high school teacher on to just discuss this, because maybe I'm way off. But I feel like at least in some pockets, and maybe it's also because we're living in a much more kind of progressive area than I think either of us grew up in. But yeah, I think similarly, I had the experience of going to 3 different high schools in 3 different states, so I feel like that was a good cultural cross-context kind of situation. And definitely living in the Bible Belt in North Texas was the most, like slut-shamey kind of culture. And also the least of anybody talking about it. Again, it was more like the Christian sex ed where it was implied, but nobody in my friend group anyway would have talked about a guy going down on a girl or a girl going down on a guy or whatever. It was just more sort of implied, or it was about the way that people dressed implied what kinds of things that they were doing, but those things were not named or spoken. So,
I remember that this girl who was 2 or 3 years older than me had the nickname like the Bloody Jungle, because her boyfriend went down on her when it was her period in year of high school. That just like further associates in your mind, like, no guy actually wants to do that, it must be gross. And it takes like a very long time to get that out of your mind.
Yeah. I definitely heard a lot of that type of stuff in college more, which is where I think I was in a situation where people were having more explicit conversations about what was happening. So I was on the crew team in high school and college, but in high school I think that was also part of my sex ed, because you would go on a bus to races that were sometimes an overnight trip away, but you would have these 3-hour bus rides. And so a lot of conversations on the bus, mixed boys and girls. And my first pornography viewing experience was one of the boys' team members brought porn, because we were staying overnight at a hotel, and this was like VCR days, and I don't know where. He brought a porn video to a group gathering, which at the time, I was just kind of like, okay, like I'm interested because I don't know context for this. So I watched a little bit of it, and I guess that's kind of a safe space in that you're in a large group, and so everyone was just watching more from like a curiosity perspective, because these were like 16-year-olds. But yeah, now looking back on it, I'm like, who was this young man that thought, I have an overnight gathering with some of my closest male friends, I'm going to bring my pornography video?
When I think about it, we all went downstate to like watch the basketball team that was playing in the championship in high school, and there was definitely some room that rented a porn movie, and it was like you said, like everybody was watching for entertainment. Yeah. Which looking back, you wouldn't want to watch a porn video with a group of 20 co-ed people, unless you're somewhere really freaky.
I think this is a perfect time to talk about learning from porn and porn giving unrealistic expectations.
I looked into this. Okay, so this is 1,100 people aged 11 to 17, and about 1/5 said that they had been asked to or had done things that they saw in porn. 30% said that real sex hadn't lived up to their expectations after watching porn, and another 37%, which would make it like 2/3, were on the fence about whether porn made it. But there was actually some really like helpful, kind of beautiful things that I saw in it, which were that a guy was like, well, porn made me think that a woman would just instantly like this, and so this was what I would do to pleasure the woman. And then what I actually learned when I started entering into the sexual world is that it's a back and forth conversation between me and the woman, and that just because one person likes this doesn't mean that the other will like this. And
okay,
I thought
so
that
I
was
feel like
lovely.
It's been raised well, that the porn can be the starting point. You can get some ideas from it. But yeah, I've definitely heard, the thing that I've heard more is the piece about it setting unrealistic expectations, especially around the violence in terms of the power dynamics in porn, and most of it being produced by men, and how women are portrayed, and how even female pleasure is portrayed, that it seems like it's still very male-centric, because it's about, kind of like what you were saying, it's about the male's power to get this woman off really fast or really hard or something like that.
Yeah, it's not like, I'm going to take another 30 minutes to centrally make this happen for you, and everybody's going to want to watch while that happens for 30 minutes.
I think that could be some really good porn. I went on a kick for a while trying to find female created porn. I still didn't really find anything that was like my personal jam, but it was just interesting kind of how even like the lighting was better a lot of the times, which is just very distracting for me. And this is how you can tell that it's made cheaply, but also that it's made by a man. Is the terrible lighting. Like, who is sitting there in like full blazing fluorescent light daylight to get some mood lighting?
Interesting thing to me, and I know that porn takes the violence to a higher level, but as someone who reads, again, a lot of romantasy written by women for women and sees what women like, there is some part of women that is very into some aspects of like the male running a show. Why was 50 Shades of Grey as popular as it was when the girls tied up a lot? And there are a lot of people like, they like to be called like good girls during sex, and they like to do exactly as the guy says, and that's like a heavy thing throughout books written by women for women. So it makes me interested when I read some studies that are like porn equaled this higher amount of violent behaviors, and they classified violent behaviors as things that I see in smut and romantasy as well, meaning that women would theoretically enjoy it. It's like,
there is just such a complicated line there, and I feel like that's why when you talk about younger people having sex, that's such a learning area, I think, is around boundaries and consent and figuring out when somebody is enjoying things and what they want out of it, which is also where I think I do come down on the side, if I were talking to my kids at an older age about sex, that I would be encouraging to explore sex within some kind of safe relationship, and not kind of start out with, while I'm not necessarily opposed to like if random stranger sex is what you want, that seems like an unsafe place to explore those kinds of questions of boundaries. And so I think like the conversation that I would have would be more around that safety and the boundaries and exploring what consent looks like, not so much on the purity side. But there is something to be said for kind of, especially when you're learning, to be learning within like a safe learning space where you kind of know and can have those conversations, which maybe look awkward at first too, because I see like, or I've read things about how, people complain about this consent culture like goes too far, because women complaining about being with a man who is stopping every 3 seconds and is like, is this acceptable? May I continue? Do you enjoy this? And it's like, shut the fuck up, I totally get that. So again, I think when you have that space of having somebody that you know a little bit better, that maybe some of that can happen as an unspoken consent, and that, and then there's like no drugs or alcohol involved, that seems just like a safer space to explore. Find where those boundaries lie.
That's funny. You made me think that my college boyfriend was a person who I explored a lot of things with and had a very trusting relationship with. But something that I really liked to do with that boyfriend during college was that I loved to role play and pretend different situations. And one time when I was packing my suitcase to go back for college, I had like dug up and found some things from when I was younger. And my mom was just being very nice. She was putting like clean clothes or something in my suitcase. And she's like, why do you have this very, very little school skirt?
Yes.
packed in here. And I was like,
So many costume
Yeah.
parties at college. No further explanation needed.
like I was gonna wear them with leggings to something. She's like, I look at it and it almost looks like a sex thing, but obviously not.
Not you, Kelly.
Yeah, never me. Even after having that, when I went back into dating in my 20s and it was with like, kind of one-off guys, it was interesting because there was very clearly some guys who knew how to take it slow, knew how to have those conversations. But the ones who didn't, I still found that I hadn't yet realized my full confidence and autonomy to be like, whoa, we need to slow it down a little bit. It'll be better for both of us if we slow it. You are trying to do this, and I never okayed that,
Yeah. And so, I think to learn so that even then when you get further along and you are having partners that may or may not know how to look for those boundaries, that it's also that kind of practice space to articulate that for yourself and to have that confidence to say, this is what I like, this is where I want you to stop. Then I think if you got into basically what I would consider like a more advanced level, that is a level where you have to go into it with a skill set to be able to say things, because if the partners are random, you have no idea what kind of skill set they're coming in with and their ability to read a room.
Important transition here to what movies, like pop culture, so this is not things that are behind the scenes, like porn and smut that people tend not to openly talk about what they learned about, but what are movies, TV shows that show unrealistic expectations of what it is like to have sex for the first time with a partner, and not necessarily losing your virginity. So there was a study on sex in movies being unrealistic. It was done by Zava, an online doctor service, which is random, but I wanted to make sure that I cited that. It looked at iconic sex scenes from over 50 films, like Dirty Dancing, 50 Shades of Grey. And then it also surveyed over 2,000 women. So 39% of women have an orgasm on screen versus 24 during sex, versus 24% of women who report never reaching an orgasm during sex. That only 27% of movies show any foreplay before sex. They just go straight to penetration, whereas 70% report foreplay before sex. And then there's just things like, Titanic. It looked so hot when we're 8 years old and we're watching the sex scene with Leonardo DiCaprio in the back of a car, but have you actually?
Yes, I have. And no, the mechanics don't, maybe if you're two very compact people or you have a very large vehicle, but you don't see Kate and Leo doing it in like a conversion van.
Yeah, that was not like a GMC Suburban, it was like a leather seat.
It was like an old-timey Model T kind of situation. I don't even know what the seating in there was like, but I can't imagine that it's even reclining seats. Maybe she's just really flexible. Maybe he's really flexible. The steam on the windows did allow them to kind of give you the sense of it being very sexy without having to actually show anything,
and then you
keep
think
it
about
PG-13.
it, but you think about being in a small enclosed space that is so hot that there's steam on the windows on your leather seat. I don't know, I guess you just have to like lean into it. This is great.
Yeah. but not educational because you can't see anything.
Can you picture the scene at the beginning of Bridesmaids with Kristen Wiig and John Hamm? That's like almost a more realistic look of like what the first time is just like, no, actually not there. You're going a little too fast.
Yeah, that like two people would meet each other, and I think this is another kind of unrealistic expectations kind of thing, and it's not just the porn with the unrealistic, expectations about like a guy getting to like come 6 times all over a woman's face or whatever. I think it's also the like movie romantic kind of things of just this like sense of women climaxing without any foreplay, women reaching orgasm from sex, from, like vaginal penetration alone. And I think also, that idea that if two people are meant for each other, if they have chemistry, that it would just be like very effortless and they would immediately sense each other's like, yeah, where you want to push that accelerator, where to hit the brakes, that you would sense that without any kind of conversation or any kind of trial and error.
Absolutely, because the reality is that it is very awkward with a lot of little trial and error, especially for the first few times, unless you're, having sex with a romance master, which has happened to me like twice in my life, and I have a lot of experience. So that's not good numbers.
So for these women who were first time, just like first shot, kill shot kind of masters, what were these two individuals like outside of the bedroom?
The best. Yeah.
That's amazing. I was expecting you to say like, freak in the sheets, but just dud in the, I don't know.
No, I mean, very, very, very odd and quirky. Yeah, I guess I could put that out. Very, very odd and quirky, which I think allowed him to be so comfortable in his skin that he was like, you need to slow down a little bit. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Maybe just speaking up for that. Like, it's not necessarily being the like sexy, confident Casanova, but it's being more like curious or perceptive.
Yeah, not particularly big, didn't look extremely like, big guy on campus or anything like that, but just knew what he was doing.
I feel like those men are rarely the sex gods, because it's kind of like the stereotype that like hot people can't be funny. Like, I do think that you go through life, if you're just ultra hot, you kind of go through life not having to try as hard to make people like you. And so, I think that pretty privilege can kind of translate. I don't know. I mean, there must be people who are like gorgeous, confident people who are also just really awesome at sex. But I'd be curious to know, if we took a lot of data points from the population, what the correlation there would be.
So one time I had this thing happen that could have been, written into like a rom-com or like a book, and how like amazing it would have been on paper, which is that I went to Georgetown. The lacrosse team was a very, very big deal there. Mm-hmm. And they all ate breakfast by me. There was this one player who I thought was extremely attractive, and we were always at breakfast at the same time. And then like 8 years later, we met again, and he like took me out on dates, was interested in me, pursuing me, and it wasn't there, Yeah.
All right, well, I realize this isn't the sample size that I need to like fully prove my thesis, but this does play into this, that I think it's just
huge in shape guy, everything, and I was like, well, now I've experienced it, and now I will not think that I was missing out on anything, that I could have just aimed, for that.
And now we are going to transition to a question from the audience.
What do you think about cum shots in porn?
Are we specifically talking about to the face, or I'm not sure about the technical definition of here. Is it just where you're aiming it, like you pull out and aim it, or is this specific to facial?
Shane Gillis, the comedian, had a funny thing about to the face, where he said that he had, okayed it with his girlfriend beforehand, that she had agreed to this. He's like, and then the second it was happening, I felt so bad. Like, it got in her eye, everything. Funny thing about with my married partner is that he feels so seriously about it that he will not even finish in my mouth, like nothing. I have told him before,
so
like,
respectful.
It is okay, it's everything, and I didn't realize all this time that he would actually like hold out until we moved to the next thing, because he did not want to do it in my mouth.
Okay. But how do you feel about a guy finishing in your mouth? Do you feel neutral about it?
I would put myself as neutral. I definitely don't mind it, but I definitely also don't mind that it's not there. I think it's just a funny thing that it took me so long to realize that he was purposely avoiding it all this time. Yeah. But there's also just like funny things, like Allie Hazelwood is a really, really popular romantic book writer, and in one of her books, the guy, thought that the girl he was interested in was with the brother, actually was not with the brother. As when they finally did have sex, he had a thing where he really wanted to come on her stomach, almost as a way to show like, you're now mine.
Yeah, see, to me it is a very, like marking your territory kind of act. And I guess that's a good question. As the smut reader of the two of us, I think that that's a good gauge of how much women are like, yes, I love this. Do you see a lot of a guy, and let's start with coming in a woman's mouth, because like I think that most of us feel neutral about that, but I don't know a lot of people.
I think that I've seen it almost like a 50-50 both ways, where sometimes it's like it's not even touched on, but sometimes it's like, and then he finished in my mouth and like I swallowed with satisfaction to show him how much I liked it.
Yeah.
But it's almost, it kind of goes into that like good girl idea of like, I love the idea that this is like my big, huge partner, and it's a big thing in like romantic books. The guys are always like, my 2 hands could hardly fit his girth. And it's like, what does your vagina look like? Like, what? Why would you want that?
Yeah, I agree. It is just kind of, it does like play into that kind of like big, strong man and like delicate woman, but then she can like take it all. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I agree. I feel neutral about the mouth thing, but you know, I could take it or leave it. I don't know that a lot of people are like truly enjoying the taste, and I guess, you know, I've got questions if that's truly, but you know, different tastes. Maybe you just don't have the right wine pairing with it yet. So to be explored on a future episode. But definitely the face thing. I don't know how much that was really happening before the rise of internet pornography, because that does seem like something, and the one time that I did try it, it was definitely a situation where the gentleman in question was like, I've seen this thing, like it just looks like fun. And I was kind of like, what about it looks fun? Because to me it is just kind of this marking your territory. But I'm like, yeah, I mean, like, try anything once for the most part if it's not going to end in you getting hurt. It did end in me getting hurt because it did get in my eyes. I don't think that either of us knew how much cum burns in your eyes. So like a little bit got in my eyes. Terrible situation. 0 out of 10. Would not do again. And
they never showed that in porn, how it burns the eyes.
They don't, and I just wonder, are these women wearing special contact lenses? Was it just me? But then I don't know if you've watched The League, Kelly. I feel it's kind of a dude show, but I did enjoy The League. The one where he blinds her with his cum, which is like, and in kind of like a humorous context, but basically like some gets in her eyes. I think they're like about to get married too. And I guess like she allows this as like a special treat for him, and then ends up going because she's allergic to it. So I felt a little bit validated by that. You know, I wasn't blinded by it, but very painful experience. And I was like, why is any woman enjoying this? But I don't know, maybe they're...
But you were so hot and turned on afterwards because you're like, even as I'm blinded, he just really owned
like,
me. I just want to be
so
owned.
Powerful.
Yeah.
I love this. I'm such a good girl. I love all of it. No,
yeah.
I hated it.
Yeah. Afterwards, he lightly tapped her cheek and said, "Good girl," and you're like, "Ooh, that's it."
A shiver ran through my body. I felt.
That's
great
literally
for
exactly
once.
how the scenes are written. Just in case, it's always like he said, "Good girl," and a shiver ran through my body. Yeah.
Well, I feel like I could really do well writing smut, actually.
You probably could. Yeah, you got the shiver and you didn't have to read the prior scenes.
My sisters and I used to humorously read romance novels. They had a little caddy of them in the front of the library, and they were like those kind of grocery store paperback romance novels, and I think that they were for sale, actually. I don't know if it was a situation that the library didn't want to like have them back after you had your filthy hands on them and done what you did. But they were always up at the front, and I do remember giggling over them with my sisters. And to be honest, probably some of my mindset and language came from them. They were not very feminist romance novels because they were like 90s romance novels, but they were entertaining.
That's funny. My first romance novel, and I didn't realize how common they were and that I could go on to read other ones. So I read this one, like maybe freshman or sophomore year of high school, called Simply Irresistible.
I like that you still remember the name. I'm really proud of it.
Because that was it. That was like my only exposure. It was like I snuck it underneath my house's lens where I just looked like I was reading a normal love book, and instead it had 4 or so solid scenes. It stayed with me, and then somewhere along the way I lost it, and I actually reread it the other month because I was like revisiting old times, and it's horrible.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. As were these books, and I was almost aware at the time, and we were kind of reading this in this kind of like, oh, this is funny, but I'm sure it was also sort of like curious on some level. And now that you say that, I do remember that my sisters and I got a hold of one that was definitely about sexy pirates, And I don't know if it was like at a beach house or we like got it from, I don't know where it came from. But we definitely like passed it around, and we would read it under the auspices of like, this is so ridiculous, it's funny, like her bountiful breasts are spilling out of her bodice on every page. But at the same time, I think again in the line of the Cosmo and the other things, it was a source of education. And as a woman, you know, I think if my parents had found any kind of pornographic materials, that would have been game over. We would have been grounded for life. But I think that my mom knew that we had this book and was just kind of like, thought that was funny. And I think that she read some pretty spicy romance stuff herself.
My mom's right now reading Fourth Wing, which definitely has some hot scenes to it, and she likes it. She's like, I think I really like this Satan. And I was like, everybody loves Satan.
I don't think my mom would read something that's so like explicitly smut. I think, again, it has to be within the safe of like, this is a historical romance book that is about the romance, but like, does it have some very hot sex scenes in it? Yeah, I think I found some stuff on my mom's bookshelf that I was like, all right, Mom. I mean, it has to come across as a very historical book, but there is a lot of bosom spilling out of bodices on the pages of these books.
That's my dad and I always make sure that we read the same book so we had something to talk about, and he really likes historical fiction, and they always had some pretty nice scenes, but one was like back to like the time of like caves when like humans, like homo sapiens were like just kind of coming to existence, and Neanderthals were still around, and there was like this scenes, and it was called Clan of the Cave Bear.
Oh my gosh, my grandma had these books.
Yeah,
she liked romance. She had some
oh my
real
gosh.
smut. Well, this was not my biological grandmother, so again, her viewpoints did not like trickle their way into my upbringing at all, because she married my grandpa when I was a baby. Oh my God. I remember looking at those very curiously.
Yeah, they called it the vagina a cleft. And so it was like John Delar. John Delar was the guy, and he definitely licked her cleft.
Oh.
Yeah.
We need a whole separate episode on euphemisms for the human anatomy that are used, especially in older romance novels where, you know, you can't just like use the words that people would actually say.
Core is now like common in like books that aren't full on smut, but when I think of core, I think of my abs.
Yeah.
Or lack of abs.
Well, now core strengthening can really just be more expansive for us. When you think about core strengthening and you're at the gym, just do a little Kegels too.
Just did one.
Kegels.
Kegels, I think.
Okay.
Maybe Kegels. Wait.
I've heard people say both.
You've done like the pelvic floor therapy.
Yeah.
What do they call it?
She didn't. I feel like both are acceptable.
I've heard both from trustworthy people. So,
and now for our last question of the episode. We both have kids. What is our role as moms in preparing our kids to be solid sexual partners?
I recognize that I actually have a bigger role with my son because I think that there's more negative influences out there about how to be a man. And I think that there's more work to be done in raising feminist sons as a society, because we've talked to our daughters about, you're empowered, you're great, like you can have it all, you can have a job and have all this. And where we're struggling to have the conversations is like, in order for women to have it all, men have to take some on too of the, you know, it's not just like, oh, you can have a job while you do 80% of the housework. It's like, no, the men have to kind of do this. So I think in the sex side of things, that's a very similar kind of thing of there's more work for the men to learn how to operate within this context of consent. I'm currently reading a book. We'll return with a full review of it, but The Birds, the Bees, and the Elephant in the Room is the one that I'm reading right now, which is kind of like how to have conversations at every different age and what some of the underlying philosophies are, and then also kind of how to deal with specific conversations and thinking in advance too about how to have those things. My current strategy, and I think this kind of vibes with the book, has been answer the question that you are asked, not any additional questions, and talk about consent early with both kids.
There was a study by Lindbergh and Cantor in the Journal of Adolescent Health, and it was on like what's the state of education that adolescents are receiving about sex, and about 2/3 of adolescents in America, their education was to wait for marriage. And so this is just
I'm glad to be part of the majority.
So this is, and this is like when they talk about sex education here, they're talking about kind of the basics of like just making sure that, you know, no STD and birth control. Because I wonder what's the best way to give your kids the education that it's not like, oh my gosh, mom, never mention a clitoris to me, please. But you do make sure that your kid's aware. In my dream world, there's some book written that is truly for high school age that speaks to these things, and it's very like somehow socially acceptable and cool. Yeah.
There was a mention when I was chatting with some of my friends the other night about the American Girl one. Did you have this when you were a kid? I gotta go back and find the name of it. I feel like there have been some good books, and I will give you a review of this one. So I do want to ask, though, Kelly, on the conversation of abstinence-only sex education, were you ever prescribed aspirin as the thing that keeps you from getting pregnant? What is the word for that?
No way.
Yes.
That's not real.
No, this is a very real thing, and I think it is an evangelical America thing. And
were you?
Yes, because this was I think probably the extent of sex ed talk that I got from my dad, which is take one aspirin, put it between your knees, and hold it there.
That's so
and
yuck.
then followed by creepy laughter. But I feel like I've heard some conservative politicians actually mention this idea before too, and again, just really gets the idea of like, don't have any awareness of what is happening down there, which really just seems like leads to teen pregnancy and a lot of STIs.
Yeah, I think
or UTIs.
that I got on birth control like maybe age 20 or something, and it was because, and I felt very, very much so like I was going behind people's backs, and I, you know, verified that it would not be reported back to my mom and dad, even though it was their health insurance that I was on it. And it was funny because my roommate after college, she's like, oh, as soon as I turned like 13 or 14, my mom was like, oh, we're gonna get a marina in you because things happen and we're just going to be safe here.
Yes.
And it just wasn't even a conversation. Or what's that vaccine that you can get?
The HPV vaccine?
Yeah, the HPV vaccine. Just to give you an idea, Gardasil. When I got that and then I went to my friend's house afterwards and I told her, like, oh, I just got the Gardasil vaccine. And she turned back to her mom and she was like, hey, Mom, do I need the Gardasil vaccine? And her mom said, oh, only floozies get
how to know your mom is old-timey in her views about sex.
A nicer word for slut.
yeah, exactly. So you can say it in good company. I actually think I didn't get the HPV shot until I was an adult. And my gynecologist was like, how do you not have this?
Definitely floozies.
And she told me that too. No, I'm just kidding. What a great gynecologist. But yeah, the birth control thing, I definitely know for my little sister and me that we both approached getting birth control under the pretext of, like, for my sister, it might have been around that she was like, oh, it's for acne or something. And for me, it was around having really terrible cramps, which I did. But yeah, absolutely, there was no way I was having that conversation. Which makes me sad that there aren't better ways to allow teenagers access to birth control.
Once they're 13, in most states, their health records are private and it's fully covered by so many health insurance companies that they can get it without, even though they're on their parents' health insurance, without their parents having to be aware that they received it. And so obviously the goal is that the parents are fully on board with it.
But the next best plan is for the child to get birth control regardless. And that's interesting because I definitely didn't know that. And I think so part of it is also getting the word out in a way that isn't going to cause screeching alarm from these more abstinence-only kinds of parents, but to get the word out to kids because, yeah, I definitely think that there are a lot of kids out there that don't know that that's the case, and they think that they have to get their parents' consent, or I don't think that I really knew how to go to the doctor without scheduling it and bringing me, or that I had access to my insurance information. And I think if I had some guidance from another adult, that been something that I could have figured out. It makes me recognize the importance of sometimes being that adult for other people. So thinking about how you're going to have those conversations with your own kids, but also when you're going to act as that trusted other adult. Because I think you can have the best relationship with your parents, and there is just this evolutionary thing of when you start to hit teenage years, your parents are the last people that you want to talk to about anything related to sex, even if you've had presumably really great conversations with them. And that's a good role too for people who don't have kids but still find so much value in being that kind of role model, important figure, that kids at that age is more important than ever to have that person who can be somebody that you approach for all of those kinds of questions that you wouldn't approach even a very open-minded parent. In this, the birds, the bees, and the elephant in the room, one of the things that she introduces pretty early on for older kids is the consent to knowledge. And it is kind of getting that sense the same way that you get consent about other things of when you can continue, and why sometimes it is important to just answer the question that you were asked and not be like, oh, this is a whole interesting entree into the world of female pleasure, is that I think that then you don't get to that creepy point if you are just kind of reading the room of what was the actual question that was asked and what information are they looking for, and not going beyond that until they give you their consent by asking follow-up questions. So I liked that as a framework. It also just makes it feel less daunting when you just have to respond to the situation in front of you in that particular moment. So Kelly, to wrap things up, I would love to hear what is your relevant smut scene of the week?
So Penny Reed and L.H. Cosway, they have a series of books on Irish rugby players, and there's one in particular. It's called The Player and the Pixie. And the premise of the book is that the player, Sean, is a hot, famous rugby player, but he really sucks at hooking up. Like, he does not know what he's doing at all.
This really goes into our earlier theory about give with both hands, I'm just saying.
So he can't get a girl to orgasm. No girl calls him back afterwards because of it. So Lucy, another rugby player's sister, makes a deal with him that she'll teach him how to be a good hookup. And so I'm going to read a scene from it to end, just to give you an idea of how smut can be educational. So scene is that she has them kneeling in front of the bed. She did provide a pillow, but she explained to him that kneeling on the bed gives him the best vantage point for going down. Okay. So, and to set it up, it's from Sean, the guy's perspective. So Lucy asks, what is the very next thing you want to do? What do you want to move and where? I licked my lips. My first instinct is to spread your legs and dive in. She nodded thoughtfully. How about instead you slide your fingertips lightly up my thighs or trace circles behind my knees? Why would I do that? Because it feels good and it builds tension. It prolongs the act. Prolongs the act, I repeat, turning this concept around in my mind and considering it from all angles. Yes, for a woman, if you want her to come before you do, you need to find that delicate balance between prolonging the act and providing fulfillment. You can't provide fulfillment if you haven't built the tension. It would be like trying to force feed me before I'm hungry. You want me to make you hungry. Exactly. End. Well, you can go on and read, because it goes on with some great tips that she gives a while to him that I'm like, ooh, if I had this book where I was 20 and I also had confidence, it could have helped a lot.
I like it from that perspective. Again, when you're like more old-fashioned kind of romance things, the woman can never be the teacher. You know, they're just sort of always the student. They're always the recipient. So I like that here, and I wish that more men would read these kinds of books, because it's kind of like the men who say, there are no women out there, like, where do I meet single women? I keep going out. And then you're like, where are you going out? They're going to like fantasy football league and whatever, and they're like, there are no single women. And it's like, dude, go to yoga class. There are so many single women, you know, not to say that you should join yoga class to be creepy and stare at women's asses, but meaningfully engage in the thing that women care about, that there are a lot of women present, and you might learn something.
Very, very often it is the man who has like more experience, and they're coming in and with their huge body parts and everything like that. But we all know that they had some teacher somewhere along the way, even if that is the case. Some patient girlfriend who.
Yeah. And I think that that's a turn on for women too, that there is vulnerability and that there is something to be learned from both sides about each other, instead of, I think that that's just such an outdated trope, this, you know, ultra experienced man. And blushing virginal woman is just not something that a lot of us identify with anymore. And probably most of us, when we were that blushing virginal woman, were with like a blushing virginal, 18-year-old.
Yeah.
Boy.
Who was very, very eager, but didn't know what he was doing. Yeah. Very, very kind and
that's
sweet.
good.
Yeah.
Then we're coming to it with some balanced power dynamics, and that's, again, that better space to kind of be exploring and figuring out things for yourself and for your other person.
Wonderful. I don't know. We'll figure out how to end them. Yeah.
I feel like we'll just need some music.